These are players you absolutely need to have in your lineup this week. They will make a difference for your team. They could win you this week. And so leaving them on your bench would be a crucial mistake. Let's start with David Montgomery, who has been very impressive to start the year. He's like the running back 16 on the season, and he's already had his bye week. So that should tell you what you need to know about his production this year. He continues to get a fair amount of the work in the Lions offense. A lot of people thought, hey, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to take over that and take the lion's share of that work this year. And David Montgomery not only has been getting a lot of carries in that offense, but he's also gotten a fair amount of targets. He's been out targeting Jahmyr Gibbs in some games, which is interesting. But you've seen David Montgomery be productive enough to where he's probably a must start every week for you, unless you have a loaded team. And I'm telling you this, in more shallow leagues and 8 to 10 team leagues, you're starting David Montgomery no matter what. This week, they're playing the Dallas Cowboys in a game where the Vegas total points line is set at 52.5 points. So he's going to have a green light for Vegas. In terms of the matchup, the Dallas Cowboys have given up the 5th most points to running backs on the season. So he's going to have a green light for his matchup. The context, he's going to have a green light because the Lions on offense have continued to stay fairly healthy. The offensive line has continued to be pretty good. And there are no external factors in this game. Also, coming off of a bye week, that is something that's going to bump his context light up. And so we're going to have that there as well. And then, like I said, the Vegas light is going to be green because 52.5 points over under. And so every single factor that we look at to determine who we should start, who we should sit in our fantasy football leagues, every single one of them says start David Montgomery. So you're plugging him into your lineups. You're not only betting on touchdown upside, but again, he's been having some work in the receiving game that has taken his floor to a level we didn't really think it would go this season. So if you start David Montgomery, I feel like this is kind of a risk-free bet. But even in, again, shallow leagues where you've got a lot of good players and you're not playing with a lot of teams, David Montgomery is somebody we are absolutely starting this week. It's a killer matchup. I want every single Lion this week, honestly. But everybody's going to start Gibbs. Everybody's going to start Amon-Ra. I figured, hey, let's go David Montgomery. He's going to be our first start of the week. Definitely throw him into your lineups.
Yeah, we're also going to have Zay Flowers here, and this could be a bit controversial, honestly. We had to look into this quite a bit as well before we were comfortable doing this because Zay Flowers has been the definition of inconsistent, and honestly, for rest of season, he's a low-end wide receiver too at best because of how much Derrick Henry is taking away from the overall production of that entire offense because it's built for him and Lamar Jackson. Zay Flowers, perfect weapon for that offense from an NFL perspective. But again, every single week, you just don't really know what he's going to do. Here's what he did against Cincinnati in one of the most highest scoring games that we're probably going to see for the entire year. 12 targets, awesome. 7 receptions, awesome. 111 yards, awesome. No touchdown, not so awesome, but still without a touchdown in half PPR formats with his opportunity and his volume, he still had like 15.5 points. That's really, really solid in a matchup that had a pretty poor defense. Now they've got another nice matchup this week against Washington, who, as good as Washington has looked, they have allowed quite a bit of production against opposing wide receivers so for the first month of the season. When you're looking at the Vegas line for that game, it's 52.5 right now. So you're expecting a higher scoring game, 2 rushing quarterbacks in Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson. We expect Derrick Henry to be productive. We expect him to have another great week. I mean, he was productive last week without even being super efficient and not getting nearly the amount of yards that you would have expected for a pretty friendly matchup against Cincinnati. Derrick Henry's still going to get his own. He's still going to have a great game. He's still going to probably get touchdowns and stuff. But with Zay Flowers, the Vegas light, the context light, the matchup light, all being friendly for him, we already established that the one negative that you're going to have every single week with Zay Flowers is his own offense. But with this situation and this matchup against the Commanders, I think you are really, really risking a 15-pointer on your bench, at least, if you sit him. Because, again, I mean, you're 1 touchdown away with Zay Flowers. If he takes that production and gets a touchdown, you're looking at a 20-plus point game, which he has shown in the past he's capable of doing. He's even more capable of doing it in matchups like this against Washington. Heck, even in week 7 against Tampa, he's got another great matchup there as well. When you look at his game log first month of the season, you saw his 18-point game against Vegas, right? Poor defense. Tough defense against Kansas City week 1. Didn't do as much, still got targets, though. Dallas, tougher matchup, didn't do anything. Buffalo, tougher matchup, didn't do anything. Cincinnati, you dream of that matchup, right? 15 points. So he is very matchup dependent. That's why we're more confident in him this week against a friendlier matchup. He's going to be able to capitalize on that opportunity.
The next guy we're going to have on this list, we're going to stay in that matchup, is Terry McLaurin. I've seen a lot of videos from analysts suggesting that Terry McLaurin is a sell. I don't really understand that one. Daniels.
Yeah, okay.
What? You think he's a sell?
I mean, if we're talking buys and sells, I think he could be a low key sell. Yeah. But
Why would you sell Jaden? Or
starting
why
this
would
week,
you sell Terry?
Because the 3 weeks that he's been super productive, he's been very big play dependent. It's all come from like a huge shot downfield, which Jaden Daniels is capable of doing. He's definitely unlocked that, but you're probably looking at like boom bust for Terry rest of the season. And I think a lot of people are like overshooting what Terry is capable of doing in that offense week in and week out, because he only had 11 points against Cleveland. Like I think that was kind of overhyped, and he was saved by a last second big play downfield. So,
but do you think two things here? Do you think that Terry McLaurin's really being highly valued, like among the community, enough to where you think you could get enough to get? I mean,
well, I think that's a valid point, and the point that you're making, right? If you've got someone that's high on Terry, you'd want to sell him, but if they're not, then you just hold him and you flex him, because he's a great flex option right now.
And I would say this as well. Like the thing with Terry that makes me feel comfortable with him is his targets: 8 targets, 6 targets, 10 targets, and 8 targets in his last 4 games. And so even if he is scoring on big plays, he is getting the target volume to where he can get floor, at least a couple of those plays. But the main thing with me and with Terry, and why I'm starting him this week, and why I think he could be a buy instead of a sell, because I'm very high on Terry McLaurin rest of the season, obviously higher than most. It's because he is a good wide receiver. Terry McLaurin has always been. He's an Indianapolis kid.
So good.
Okay, he's always been one of the premier wide receiver talents in the entire NFL. If you don't think that, you don't know what you're talking about. He is an extremely good wide receiver talent. He's always had bad quarterbacks, so we've never really seen Terry put it together. When you're looking at what he did in his first couple of years, he's always been like perennial wide receiver 2. 27, 21, 25, 28, 23, except for the 1 year in 14 where in 22 where he was finally the wide receiver 14. This year, what do I expect Terry McLaurin to be? Probably a high-end wide receiver 2 or a mid wide receiver 2.
Wait, you mean do exactly what Terry McLaurin has done in the past?
Yes. The difference is I don't think people are valuing Terry McLaurin at that price level. And I think with Terry, the reason he's a start this week is because, like Nathan mentioned, the Vegas line for that game is set at 52.5 points. So the Vegas light's going to be green for Terry. Jaden Daniels is playing some of the best quarterback play in the NFL at the moment. Undeniably, if you're watching any of the Commanders games, which you should because they are extremely fun to watch, he is playing lights out. Go ahead.
I'll tell you what, to go off of that too, Daniels, even last game, in a game where they were all over Cleveland really for the most of the game, he still didn't even have that great of a game. He kind of looked like a rookie in the first half. But even though he had kind of an off game, and had to come back, because I think he started like 7 for 17 actually with his passing attempts, which was, way out of character compared to what he's done for the first month of the season. Terry was still able to get like more than 10 points in that game, right? Against a defense is pretty tough against Cleveland. And now you're seeing the Baltimore matchup where they just let Cincinnati drop 35 points on them. They had to beat them and get lucky in overtime. I think this is a great opportunity for Terry to be productive again for a 4th straight week. So,
I mean, Jaden Daniels, that was probably his least accurate game of his NFL career, and it's 60%. I mean, you're talking about that's like Anthony Richardson's most accurate game. And so if that's Terry's floor,
crossing your fingers for AR to ever do that in his entire career. So
correct. But also when you're looking at it, though, the Ravens have actually allowed the 2nd most points to wide receivers this year. And so this is a very good matchup for Terry McLaurin. This is a very good matchup in terms of overall total points. And whether or not he's a buy, we got into a mini discussion there. You can let us know in the comments what you think about that. I'm personally, again,
totally unrelated discussion.
I know. For me, you know me.
Yeah, he's a
I'm like, yes, for real. You know me. I'm like, oh, good player, and this looks like a good offense. They look like one of the better offenses in the NFL, and so that's why I'm like, he's the best receiver there. So that's but again, I feel like everybody's undervaluing him. You feel like people might be overvaluing, so it's all going to depend on where he's valued. So
yeah.
All right. So next guy here.
Yeah, next guy that we've got here is Tajae Spears. We alluded to Tony Pollard being a guy that's going to be super productive this week, but I think without a question, you're starting Tony Pollard every single week with how productive that he has been outside of like one dud in the first 5 weeks. But with Tajae Spears, he's someone that like generally is kind of a last resort flex option. If you are totally depleted of depth, if you have a ton of injuries or a ton of buys going into week 6, you're like, shoot, I have Tajae Spears on my team. Go ahead and start him and honestly feel good about doing it, because we'll say this every single week. We will continue to say the Colts defense is abysmal. And if you want a better reason than like Gus Bradley sucks as a DC, here's a better reason. They have so many injuries and they are continuing to pile up on the defensive side of the ball specifically. Even if they wanted to play good defense, they wouldn't be able to because they have like backups to backups that are starting right now. So in the run game, all they have is like Grover Stewart. He's the only guy left that's healthy. Latu isn't making like super big splash plays in the run game because he's an edge. He's making a lot more impacts in the passing game, but they've got no one left. So you saw Tank Bigsby and ETN both get their own there. They made ETN look good, and he's been really inconsistent this season. He had like 12 points last week in PPR formats, and then you had Tank Bigsby, who obviously had a ton of breakaway runs and was pretty much single-handedly won them that game. So with this situation going up against Tennessee, you've seen in the past Tennessee consistently run the ball all over the Colts. They have their number in that metric. I think you're going to see that continue this week with guys like Tony Pollard and Tajae Spears both being productive. If I were to bet on one over the other, I'd bet on Tony Pollard being the more productive guy. But again, I already said he's going to be the guy that you're starting without a question. I don't think anyone's questioning that this week. He's a must start. But with Tajae Spears being the more debatable guy, and his receiving usage as well, I think he has the opportunity to be productive. And you saw Tajae Spears actually get a goal line carry over Tony Pollard in the Miami game a couple weeks ago, and he was very productive as well. So the goal line carries, the goal line opportunities, the great friendly matchup, and Will Levis just being an incompetent passer, I think bodes really well for both of those running backs in that offense.
So this next one is definitely not sexy by any means, but I think the old and fat allegations for Keenan Allen may have actually caught up to him a little bit. And maybe this is an overstatement, but the old part is showing itself in the fact that he's already missed 2 games. And I think it was a hammy, right, Nathan? Am I correct in that it was a hammy?
Probably. It usually is for 32-plus-year-old guys.
So the old part there, and the fat part, because he did get 11 targets in his first game, but since then, 3 targets and 6 targets. 6 targets in his last game. He only had 6 points against Carolina. Caleb Williams has the best game of his career. Now, as good of a matchup as Carolina was for the Chicago Bears, the Jacksonville Jaguars are an even better matchup. The Jags have been all over the place defensively this year, and they have given up the most points to wide receivers in fantasy football of any team in the NFL. And so you saw us move DJ Moore way up our rankings because of that. Keenan Allen was still kind of in the H tier. We ranked him a little bit more conservatively. The Vegas line for this one is, about average, 44.5 points, total points. But with Allen, this is, if you were going to start Allen this year, if you have him and you drafted him to start him, because you probably drafted him in the first 8 rounds, if you draft Keenan Allen, this is when you start him. This is the week you just go out and you start Keenan Allen. And so I'm going to be plugging him in my lineups this week just because, again, this is a defense that gives up a ton of points to wide receivers. Caleb Williams just came off his best game as a pro, going against another bad defense. I expect him to build on that. And I think this time around, you're going to see Keenan Allen get more than 6 targets, and I think he's going to end up returning and end up with like 10 to 12 points, which is flexible. So I'm going to be flexing Keenan Allen this week. Again, I understand if you think he's old and fat and you want to leave him out of your lineups, that's probably fine. This one's a little bit riskier. But again, if there were ever a week this year I was going to start him, it's this week. I'm plugging him into my lineups.
Yeah, and the last guy we're going to have here, we're going to jump back to the Tennessee Titans offense, and I know it's ugly and disgusting, but we are going to have you start DeAndre Hopkins this week. Calvin Ridley, again, since he is a number 1 guy there, is going to attract a lot of defensive attention. You are assumedly going to start Calvin Ridley this week in a very friendly matchup, but with DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to be that fringe guy where you're like, I don't really know, but let me show you what D-Hop has actually been able to do this season. Not very much. 1 point in the first 2 weeks of the season. Green Bay, he has a nice 16-point game, and then against Miami, he puts up 4 points. Calvin Ridley doesn't do anything either. This is entirely dependent, again, on matchup and what they're able to get out of every single receiver in that offense. Generally, what we've seen, Calvin Ridley hasn't been much better. Outside of his 2-touchdown game where he had a rushing and receiving touchdown, he's only had 6 points against Chicago in week 1, and then same as D-Hop, 1 point and 2 points in weeks 3 and 4. So these guys are kind of just every single week because Will Levis is that disgusting and that bad of a quarterback. Callahan can't even get through an entire game without cussing him out because he's just making the dumbest possible decisions in the game. It's horrible. It's absolutely disgusting. But of all the weeks where you would bet on DeAndre Hopkins being productive, it would be against the Indianapolis Colts because we have seen it since D-Hop came into the league. Since he was on the Houston Texans, with and without Deshaun Watson, he was productive. He literally has their number, and he's probably going to dominate. Calvin Ridley, honestly, has also been productive against the Colts in his own right as well. But if you were to see any week where D-Hop was able to usurp situation or transcend situation and be able to be productive despite Will Levis being inaccurate more than half the time, I think you're going to see D-Hop get a decent amount of usage here. You're probably going to see a higher scoring game than originally anticipated. And I mean, it could eventually be a shootout towards the end of the game, and that's going to bode well for the receiving assets in that offense as well. I mean, we just talked about Tajae Spears and Tony Pollard being productive here. We're going out there and we're kind of, putting our life on the line, betting on two guys in a bad offense with D-Hop and Tony Pollard. The Colts defense in the passing and the run game is bad enough for
atrocious
that to happen. I mean, you just saw Najee Harris was productive and George Pickens productive in the same offense with Justin Fields throwing them the ball, who cannot make a read past his first read. He is so bad, and they made him look good. If they can make Justin Fields look good, they can make they can make Will Levis look even better, right? So count on it. Trust us. It's going to happen. I think D-Hop's going to have a good week.
And then one more here I've got for you. I'll give you a quarterback, and it's going to be Jordan Love. Jordan Love is one of the only guys in our model this week that has all green lights. It's because the Vegas line for this one is pretty good, 49.5 points against the Cardinals. It's because the matchup light is pretty good. I think the Cardinals have given up the first or second most points. They've given up, the seventh most points to quarterbacks this year. So this ends up being a pretty good matchup for Jordan Love. And again, he is kind of a friend guy. You might have two quarterbacks on a team with Jordan Love. So we're going to suggest you throw him into your lineup this week. Again, high scoring game. He's getting healthier now, and so he's going to be projected for more points. And so you can throw him into your lineup, start him at quarterback, and feel pretty good about that as well. So there you go. Our must starts for the week. Throw these guys in your lineups because we feel like they could end up winning you this week in fantasy football. But do us a favor. Please make sure you drop a like and make sure you're subscribed. Really appreciate you doing that. It takes 2 seconds, but it helps us out more than you know. So we appreciate you guys so much for that. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you later.